So without further ado, I present to you the story of Grandote. This story begins deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Chihuahua in northern Mexico, with a young man named Grandote, a member of the Taruhumaran Indians. Grandote was a common man, but was strikingly handsome and well respected for his hunting prowess and ability to run relentlessly for several days at a time, impressive even amongst his people, the Taruhumaran, who are known to this day for their incredible ability to run terrific distances. Grandote was well admired and attracted the attention of a beautiful and mystical young woman who was a healer and a person who had visions. The two fell in love, and not long after, they were married. They were happy for a time, content to live by the old ways in the mountains of Chihuahua, and soon Grandote and his wife were blessed with a beautiful daughter. A few good years passed, but word began to come more often and in increasingly somber tones of the approach of Spanish conquistadors, pillaging their way north. The conquistadors sought gold at all costs and took slaves along with them to aid them in their quest, killing all who stood in their way. Grandote and his people wished to avoid bloodshed, and the pressure grew too great. So eventually they decided to implore the wisdom of Grandote's wife. As the most skilled healer, it was up to her to decide the tribe's way forward. So she made all the necessary preparations and attempted a vision quest. But unfortunately, all was not to go well. You see, among this band was one woman, a wicked woman, who was very jealous of Grandote's wife. Why should one so beautiful also be gifted with great power, an ability to heal, and a vast knowledge of plants and herbs? The wicked woman was not as skilled as Grandote's wife, but she did know enough about plants to know which ones could be concocted into a poison. Grandote's wife fell ill, but ever loyal to her people, she continued to search her spirit for an answer. She slipped into a waking dream, feverish visions playing out before her closed eyes. Her whole body writhed in agony. The whole tribe was gathered around, and Grandote held her hand when suddenly her eyes flashed open and she intoned in a low, pained voice, "You must go north, to the home of the thunder and lightning gods, to the twin mountains, the breasts of the earth. There you will find peace and protection." And then, surrounded by loved ones, Grandote's beautiful wife drew her last breath. A silence fell over the assembled people, broken eventually only by the sound of her young daughter crying. In the days following, Grandote was visited again and again by his wife in his dreams, telling him to go to this mystical place, to the mountains called Oaxatoya. He became obsessed, and on the fourth day, he gathered what people would go with him and struck out north in search of peace. Grandote and his group went along an old trail, which was left eons before by their ancestors, and they made steady progress, traveling many miles a day, even with the accompanying young and old ones. Eventually, they were far north and began to see the mountains of legend, two peaks standing prominently on the horizon, shrouded in storm clouds. Many people were afraid. They had all heard stories of this place, knew that only the bravest of heart dared go near the peaks for fear of being struck down by lightning from the mighty gods who lived there. But Grandote comforted his people, telling them of the visions he received in his dreams from his wife, of the peace and protection that such mighty gods surely promised. "It can't be all bad, you know," he said. "After all, Colorado boasts 300 days of sunshine." The days passed swiftly, and when the band finally reached Oaxatoya, they made camp in a valley which was foreseen in Grandote's wife's visions, the Valley of the Rising Sun, a place of unbearable beauty. The group found this place quite suitable, and indeed they prospered in the shade of the mountains, becoming shepherds of the land and intimately aware of every ridge, every valley, every dike wall and goat path. Grandote walked those goat paths daily, taking in the land around him and carrying always with him the spirit of his beloved wife. Sometimes he walked with his growing daughter as well. The years passed by, and the Wahatoya became this people's home. They were fed by the deer, elk, and fish which were abundant, and they adorned themselves with the ample stones that they found across the mountain, gold which shone with the light of the sun. Grandote's daughter was more like her mother every day, learning all the ways of her people and of the nature around her, until she came to be perhaps even more skillful, even more beautiful than her mother before her, and it is said that she was held in great favor by the mighty gods of those twin peaks. And so, of course, this invoked the ire of the same wicked woman who once so hated Grandote's wife. Once more, the witch gathered her dark materials and brewed a potent poison. The next day was, for Grandote, a horrible mirror image of the worst day of his life. Only this time, his daughter lay dying instead of his wife. This poison was a cruel one, and the young woman lay in obvious, terrible pain, and the hours stretched on unbearably. Eventually, Grandote, shattered in spirit, called out to the gods of Wahatoya, begging them to please bring peace to his daughter. Almost immediately, the valley began to fill with the sound of rolling thunder. A black storm came whipping in unbelievably fast. People were sent this way and that, running for cover, until only Grandote remained with his daughter in the howling wind and pelting rain. He closed his eyes, turned his head to the heavens, and prayed. When Grandote opened his eyes again, his daughter was dead. The gods had answered his prayer, for she now lay peacefully, muscles relaxed, a faint smile on her face, as if caught up in a pleasant dream. In her last moments, the spirits of the mountain had lifted her away far from her pain, and now she lay in eternal peace. A few minutes later, the body of an old woman was found nearby, scorched and twisted, her face seared in an everlasting scream. It was the corpse of the jealous woman who wrought so much pain onto Grandote and his people. The gods had seen fit to take her life too, but while the daughter passed in a painless reverie, this witch had been burned and her spirit trapped in the mountain. To this day, you can hear her howling and wailing in the winds atop the peaks. Grandote was inconsolable, and he felt betrayed by the gods of the mountain, fierce gods who doled out death as a means of easing pain. He decided again to travel north, and his people, having long come to view him as their unquestioned leader, agreed to come with him. But no matter how far north he went, the dreams kept coming. Sometimes Grandote saw his daughter, alive but distraught, pleading with him to go back to where she was happy, please to return to their home in the Wahatoya. Other times he saw his wife and daughter both, together and dancing in joy in the shade of the east peak in the valley of the rising sun. Grandote was growing older now, and he saw people around him who were older still. These people deserved a home, and who was he to deprive it from them? Once more, he gave his people a new plan, and they turned south to head back home. Along their way back, the group stopped for water one day along a thin river near a tall and extraordinarily wide mountain. Opposite the river of them stood, with his arms crossed, Cuernaverde, a mighty Comanche chief, a warrior of great stature and ability who is known to wage war with the Spaniards. Cuernaverde was suspicious of this band of outsiders trooping through his territory. Grandote told them their tale and said that they were headed back to Wahatoya, where they had made their home, but Cuernaverde believed in none of it. He knew that the Twin Mountains were mighty and terrifying, a place where no tribe could call home, for the spirits who lived there forbade it. He prepared to attack Grandote and his group, believing them to be liars, maybe even enemies. But before he could raise his spear, Grandote called out again to the spirits of the Wahatoya, praying that they help him and his people pass. There came then a great rumbling from the earth, followed by flashes and peals of loud thunder. Ash and smoke rose up from the ground, buffeted about by the wind and whirling, spinning, forming, taking shape of... The smoke and ash took the shape of Grandote's daughter, pale as ice and beautiful, terrible. Hovering in the air above the river and facing Cuerno Verde, the ghostly woman pointed wordlessly south, towards the Wahatoya. Her message was clear. Cuerno Verde was stricken by a mixture of awe and fear, and he bowed his head, lowered his weapon, and implored Grandote and his people to pass by. He never forgot that day, and the story of what transpired lived on in that area, so that even today the tall and wide mountain nearby is known as Greenhorn, which is English for Cuerno Verde. By this point, Grandote was thoroughly convinced of the power and intention of the gods who lived in the mighty Twin Mountains. He led his people safely home and vowed never to leave again. And indeed, he never did leave again, although he never had the chance. You see, all the while that the years kept coming, so had the Spanish. When Grandote was an old man, the force that he had fled from for almost all of his life finally caught up to him. The magic of the Wahatoya was strong, and it kept the tribe safe for a long time. But the power of man's greed is strong too, and one day one of Grandote's tribe members was captured by a Spanish scout, and soon after a large force set upon his people. The Spanish lusted after the gold which Grandote's people wore, and so they enslaved them and forced them to work in the bowl of the East Peak, shattering stone and digging deep under the threat of brutal violence. Since Grandote was old, he was able to fool the conquistadors. Nobody expected him to be nimble or clever enough to escape and survive on his own in the wilderness, but that is precisely what he did. One night, by the cover of darkness, Grandote stole away and climbed high up on the mountain to a point overlooking all of his people, soon to begin their day toiling away. Grandote felt that his people were suffering, felt how their hearts cried out for freedom. One final time, Grandote prayed to the gods of the mountains to release his people from their slavery, from evil and from starvation and terror. And as always before, the gods answered his prayer in an abrupt and terrible fashion. Without warning, a great storm roared up, greater than any before. Lightning struck the mountain, and with a tremendous crash, trees and rocks came tumbling down. The whole mountain seemed to be collapsing. Through the chaos, Grandote saw the gold mine camp, tents full of his people and of Spaniards, obliterated, destroyed, consumed by the power of the mountain. Overcome by a terrible understanding, Grandote wept. At some point in the night, the storm broke. Grandote awoke with the first rays of light, felt the calmness of the air, and watched a red-gold dawn spread over the sleeping mountain. The shape of the rock bowl was different now, widened and deepened by the chaos of the storm. But everything was quiet and peaceful, and the only sign of violence lay far below, tiny boulders and trees, shattered and strewn about like toys. Grandote's prayer had been answered, and his people had been released. It is said that to this day, their spirits can still be seen and heard floating across and singing on the small lake high up on the mountain, the Lake of the Singing Spirits. And further south, they say you can still and forever will hear the screams of the Spaniards trapped inside the mountain, their spirits never to be released. This place we now call the Valley of the Wailing Whales, and it stands just south of the Lake of the Singing Spirits. In the remaining years of his life, it is said that Grandote lived on and wandered these mountains alone until finally it was his time to join his wife and daughter and walk once more through the green hills and valleys hand in hand, a smile on his face. To this day, there are signs of this story written on the mountain's face. In the mornings, When the sun first casts light across the bowl of the east peak, the profile of a young Indian man can still be seen facing west, and as the day goes on, his face grows longer. He ages, and then he finally disappears with his mouth stretched wide open in a furious shout. In the evenings, the profile of a miner can be seen, facing east, the light on his helmet clearly indicating his occupation. All the souls of the people who died in that storm remain still in the mountain. Today, the Lake of the Singing Spirits has changed, been dredged, and is now called Bear Lake. But a person can still see the spirits there in the mists and hear them in the singing of tiny frogs. The winds whistling and moaning and groaning in the valley of the wailing whales will remain until the mountain itself falls.
So there it is. One of the quintessential stories of the Spanish Peaks. It has Louis B. Sporletter written all over it. Magic, drama, unverifiable historic details. This story leads to more questions than answers. For instance, you may ask, seriously? The mountains just killed everyone? That's the ending? Darn right. These mountain gods are Old Testament. You're listening to Tumbleweed Radio, by the way. I actually think that that's the biggest takeaway from this story. It's a warning about living in the mountains. Mountains can be brutal, and they don't discriminate. You can get by all right up there if you're smart about it, and even have a real good time. But the fact is, a mountain is just a great big mound of massive potential energy. A rock slide can take out even the smartest of hikers. And even if you don't fall off a cliff, and if you don't get squished, even if you avoid peril by gravity altogether, you're still in danger. There aren't often small accidents out in true wilderness. This isn't a Disneyland safari. This isn't Boulder. Now, supposedly that story takes place some 300 odd years ago. How long ago the story was first told is another matter entirely. Like I talked about in the last episode, it is very difficult to know if this story is the product of Louis Sporletter's own imagination or if it was told to him by one of the ambiguous Native Americans that he said that he communed with. If you recognize this story and think that you might know something about its origin, please write me an email. I'll put my address in the description of the episode. I'd love to find out more about this story and give credit to the proper originators of the tale. If you have any other questions, concerns, ideas, or anything like that, you can feel free to write me about those things as well. I'd love to hear from you folks about what you think of the show so that I can always be improving it and stuff like that. Many thanks to every single person involved with the Spanish Peak Scout Ranch for creating a magical space in which these stories truly come to life and are believable. Many thanks also to Dustin Boyle for sending me his copy of the infamous Doug draft of the Grandote legend, and thanks a million to Doug Brisson, a legend in his own right, for telling this story to myself and countless other young folks over the years. Doug is a former camp director at the Spanish Peak Scout Ranch, a longtime camp ranger, and a lifelong resident and appreciator of the mighty Wahatoya Mountains. He truly carries the torch of Louis B. today. I was able to talk to Doug for a while earlier this year, before the pandemic went global, and we had a wonderful time talking about our experiences as backpacking guides, about the way that camp used to be, and about the mysteries and splendor of these romantic Spanish peaks. I'd like to share with you my interview with Doug, and I'd like to have another. Perhaps someday both will be the case. But for now, I'd just like to close this episode out with a few words from him, words that I think really provide great insight as to why people are still drawn to life in the mountains, even understanding the inherent danger.
We had talked, emailing back and forth about the spiritual things and the things that you get. And, some people call it secrets of the mountain. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I said, well, they have to stay secrets. You have to gain those secrets yourself.
I know.
You can't tell them. You can't tell people. People want to know where the gold is. And
yeah.
The gold is the aspen and the dandelions.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't really convey that in an article or in a podcast or whatever.
No, people have to be there.
They will never.
They have to experience it, and they have to be in the right mind. It's like I tell people, I've always been afraid of the heights, so I took on climbing.
Yeah, of course.
I've always been afraid of the dark, and I still am afraid of the dark to this day. And the thing is going out solo and doing trail by yourself, dangerous work with axes and stuff, doing marking trail and stuff, and going out solo and being where you're working trails, so you kind of know where you are, but you never know what's going to happen at night, and storms come in and stuff like that, and it's you. It's basically just you, and it's a real eye-opener to your true self.
Mm-hmm. Well, there it is. From Doug's own mouth, this podcast is useless. Thanks for listening anyway, folks. This is Tumbleweed Radio, of course. I'm Connor Orr. Peace out until next week.